Yeah, what's up everybody, so good day, this video going reaction to some dude MCU phase 7, which is finally here right now because well, part 1 just came out 5 months ago and then part 2 just came out a number of days ago, which was last week. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to the reaction to that video, so what you do next that reaction.
Boy, that line for milk sure was long. Hey guys, and welcome to the final saga of my version of the MCU,
Oops.
the Secret Wars saga. Now without any further delay, let's begin. Kicking off this saga will be X-Men Onslaught. We open to a beautiful landscape where we would see blue skies and tall mountains. That would be until the X-Jet will come soaring into view. Inside, we would see Beast on the pilot chair, as well as all of the rest of the X-Men. We would see Cyclops, Emma Frost, Colossus, Shadowcat, Gambit, Rogue, and Iceman. Wolverine is also amongst them as well, as after the snap, he has decided to settle with his newfound family and rejoin the team. But surprisingly, the professor is on board this mission as well, and he appears to be contemplating deeply. Rogue would ask the professor if it is really safe to come with them, but the professor would reiterate that it is important that he is on this mission, as he feels that Eric would be more obliged to hear the X-Men out as he is on this mission. And we will get a brief flashback of Xavier meeting with Maria Hill, who is now the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. after Nick Fury's retirement, and she explains how the United Nations wanted to gain access to Genosha for its resources, but the island leader, Magneto, has destroyed every vessel that they have sent to get those resources, so now they are entrusting the X-Men, who they see as the most eligible to negotiate with Magneto, as they has had multiple encounters with him in the past. The professor was just worried that sending the X-Men alone will provoke Magneto into a fight, and after the loss of Nightcrawler, Angel, and Jean Grey, he is not willing to lose any more of his students, so he will be accompanying them on this mission as well. And then Beast would call out to the team, saying that he has eyes on the island, and Iceman would be the first to rush toward the window, smushing his face against the glass like a kid, and he would yell finally, and that if he had to spend another minute inside with Wolverine's smelly ass, he would hop off the plane himself, and Wolverine in response would put Bobby in a headlock, telling him that he'll kill him. Whilst the plane was getting settled, Emma would walk towards Cyclops and ask him if he was alright to go on this mission, and Cyclops would reassure her, but Emma could see that the loss of his teammates has taken a toll on him, and as he felt as he was the leader of the X-Men, it was his responsibility to make sure that everyone on his team was safe. This interaction would signal that the two have gotten closer over the time spent and have grown to harbor more feelings toward each other each day. And they weren't the only two, as Gambit and Rogue have officially begun dating. And as the jet door would open, the X-Men would step out of the island, and they would be met with an enchanting scenery and views of a magnificent landscape. "It's beautiful," Shadowcat would say. "It is unlike anything I've ever seen before," Colossus would add on. Cyclops would regain everyone's focus, telling them they have a mission to get to, and they need to find Magneto. The screen would then shift into a militarized base, where inside we would see all sorts of contraptions, but above all else would be giant mechanical robots being worked by one of a faction of workers, all coordinated by one man. This would turn out to be Boulevard Trask, and as he was walking around the base doing checkups on his creations, he would be greeted by a mysterious figure. We wouldn't see their face or hear their voice, however, but they would inform Trask that the X-Men have now landed on Genosha, and that is the perfect time to unleash his creations onto the islands. Trask would smile at this, telling the figure that he'll prepare the Sentinels to arrive there shortly. On the island, the X-Men would emerge from the lush forest and stumble upon a majestic city that looks straight out of a fairy tale. In the center of the city would be a giant castle with an M crested on the front. "Guess we found him," Gambit would say. But before the X-Men could take another step, they would be instantly surrounded by troops, as they would call the X-Men trespassers and demand to know what they are doing on the island. However, before the team could defend themselves, a familiar voice would echo from above, and Xavier would look up to see the familiar face of his longtime friend turned enemy, Magneto. And he hovers down and demands to know what the X-Men are doing on his island. Xavier would speak up, saying how Magneto has been uncooperative, and the X-Men being here is a consequence of his unwillingness to share his island's resources. And Magneto would then escort the X-Men along with his troops inside of his castle. As the X-Men are being escorted, they are marveled at the sights that Magneto has created, as they see many mutant families, children, and babies going about their daily lives. Magneto would then explain that the island is supposed to be a safe haven for all mutant kinds, and that it is supposed to shelter them from the abuse that they receive from the outside world. Magneto continues saying how they need the resources of Genosha to sustain the island, otherwise it would delve into chaos. Beast would then ask where his little team was of evil mutants, and Magneto would officially say that the Brotherhood has been disbanded, and that where his other teammates have gone off to, he does not know. However, he is aware that his two children, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, has joined the team known as the Avengers. Meanwhile, we would see a legion of sentinels flying over the Indian Ocean, approaching the southeastern coast of Africa, as the island of Genosha would be present in the distance. Due to Magneto being occupied with the X-Men, he does not notice the oncoming sentinel attack, and now the sentinels would be directly above the island and start landing in each section with large crashes. Magneto would instantly be on a high alert as the robots would start destroying everything in sight. Magneto, along with the help of the X-Men, would begin to fight off the Sentinels while trying to save as many lives as they can, but more Sentinels would land on the island and wreak havoc, causing many homes and wildlife to be destroyed. One Pacific Sentinel would have its sensors on Magneto and would begin to attack. Magneto is enraged and would start destroying each Sentinel he comes across with his powers, but one manages to surprise him from behind and blast him, causing him to lose focus as many other Sentinels start to gang up on him as well, causing him to be overwhelmed and badly beaten. Cyclops would remember that these Sentinels were the same types that the Hellfire Corps used and wondered why they're here, and as the army of Sentinels continued to destroy each section of the island, Colossus would start bulldozing through an entire army of them, but his eyes would dart toward a young mutant girl with an injured leg from the Sentinel attack. The mutant girl is crying as a Sentinel locks its red eyes on her. Quickly, Colossus is charging, attempting to save the girl, but another Sentinel gets in his way and blasts him away using its beams. Colossus endures, but another Sentinel flies down and crashes onto the hero, pinning him to the ground. And Colossus would watch as the Sentinel would approach the girl and lift its leg up. The girl could not move as her leg was injured, and with a sickening crunch, the Sentinel's foot is implanted onto the ground with the girl under it. This enrages Colossus as he lifts the Sentinel that was pinning him and rips its leg off before jumping towards its face and bashing its head with a ferocious punch. He then looked at the Sentinel that crushed the girl and jumps towards it. With a furious roar, he punches through the Sentinel's chest and the robot falls to the ground. We would see the mass destruction of what was once a beautiful island inhabited by mutants. And it was a long and hard battle, but the X-Men would eventually come out on top as they would manage to destroy the last of the Sentinels. But it is a hollow victory as the island of Genosha is completely destroyed, and we would see Magneto standing alone in the wreckage, damaged but alive. Xavier would approach him, avoiding the danger that the Sentinels had posed, and with a solemn expression, he tries to say something, but Magneto cuts him off, reiterating how this was all the X-Men's fault, as they were sent here to distract him, so the Sentinels get to jump on him. As a result, his island, his people, were destroyed. As Xavier tries to explain himself, Magneto would not give him the right, as he would hold his hand out, and a steel bar would start to envelop Xavier's throat, and Magneto would start to strangle him. The X-Men would try to intervene, but Magneto, using his free hand, would use the wreckage of a Sentinel to block their path. And as Magneto continues to choke Xavier, he is caught from behind as Wolverine impales him with his claws. But But Magneto would turn to him, and with an unreadable expression, he focuses his power on Wolverine. From this, Wolverine would back away in pain as he feels his adamantium skeleton start to shake. Xavier releases the steel bar around his neck and pleads with Magneto to stop as Wolverine starts to shout in pain. But Magneto, with a stone face, would amplify his power, and a gruesome sight would be bestowed as the adamantium skeleton of Wolverine is ripped from his body, causing him immeasurable amounts of pain. Wolverine then collapses onto the ground, his body twitching and bleeding everywhere. The X-Men would see this, and Iceman would become enraged, charging towards him and trying to freeze him using his ice powers, but Magneto would fend him off. The rest of the X-Men would join in as well, as Magneto would continue to fight the team. Xavier would plead with everyone to stop fighting, but his pleas would fall onto deaf ears as Colossus would charge at Magneto, but the mutant would simply push Colossus away. Cyclops would attempt to blast Magneto using his optic blast, but Magneto would simply deflect him using a metal sheet and fling it towards Cyclops. But Rogue would get Cyclops out of the way before flying towards Magneto, delivering a punch to his chin. But this would only stung Magneto for a moment as he would use his powers to bind Rogue in a metallic rope that was part of one Sentinel. Distraught from having his pleas be unheard, Xavier would try harder than ever to try and penetrate Magneto's mind. And as the Once Island leader tries to combat this psychic attack, something of cataclysmic events occur as the bodies of both Xavier and Magneto would start to morph and converge into each other before the bodies would be hurtled, and an ominous flash of light would envelop the island, and everyone would cover their eyes. The light would dissipate and the dust would settle, and we would see a lone figure standing in the wreckage. This would be the figure known as Onslaught. The X-Men would be unsure of what to do, but Shadowcat would run towards Wolverine's body as she would turn him over to see that he was still alive but barely conscious. Onslaught would stare at his hands as he was unsure of what he was. But then out of nowhere, Onslaught would swipe his hand and a valley of energy beams would follow and start to engulf the X-Men as they would scream in pain. Onslaught would then start to hover towards the air, and he would blast towards the sky until he was out of view, leaving the X-Men bruised and many Sentinel parts still scattered over the landscapes and a destroyed island. The X-Men are now on the X-Jet flying back toward the mansion. Wolverine is still in an incubator, and Cyclops is still shaken on the massacre that happened on Genosha. So much death, destruction, and violence. For what? Just because they aren't considered humans? He remembers how happy the mutant family were whilst he looked around the island, and later thought of how their corpses laid on the ground from the Sentinel attacks, machines that were made by humans, and it made him think about the purpose of the X-Men as a whole. Emma notices Cyclops' demeanor and tries to comfort him, but then the X-Men would then later return to the mansion and figure out how they could locate Onslaught. But Beast would have the idea that they could use Cerebro with Emma as a telepath, so they do just that, and surprisingly is unable to locate Onslaught, as it would appear that the creature was not even on the planet currently. So Beast makes the assumption that Onslaught must have flown off-world, but then a voice catches the X-Men by surprise, putting them on guard, and they would each turn around to see a mysterious figure who had somehow managed to enter inside of the mansion. The name's Bishop, and I think I know a way to get your professor back. We would get a post-credit scene of Boulevard Trask in his laboratory, seemingly angry about how much of his machines were destroyed, but then the same mysterious figure would walk in front of him, demanding that he try again harder next time, as the mutant threat must be eliminated from this world. And this mysterious figure would turn out to be none other than Maria Hill, who had used the excuse of borrowing Genosha's resources as a way to lure the X-Men into their deaths. But seeing as how her plan had failed, she has other ways in eliminating the mutant threat. And as she holds out a device, it would showcase the Avengers symbol. The next project would be Moon Knight Season 2. And there wouldn't be a specific villain in this season. I'd rather have it be more of a character study of Moon Knight in general, and have this season really delve into the lore of Egyptian mythology. The movie following this will be Shang-Chi and the Wreckage of Time. And this movie would involve the concept of messing with time, as well as having a variant of Kang as the main antagonist, who would be Immortus. And I'd also have Doctor Strange integrated into the plot as well, as he could provide some much needed exposition on what exactly is going on. And I'd have Immortus be the villain of this movie just to set up Kang as one of the main antagonists in this new saga. And Immortus would eventually be defeated by Shang-Chi and Doctor Strange, but we would then get a post-credit scene of a cameo of the Kang that we are familiar with. The next movie is Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. This would follow more of Wakanda's lore, as well as developing the relationship between T'Challa and Storm, the latter of which will be pregnant throughout the movie. And this would give a chance to explore T'Challa's responsibilities as a king, husband, and soon-to-be father. The villain of this movie would be Achebe, who in the comics was a country farmer, however, whose life was destroyed by rebel Wakandan soldiers. They ambushed his farm and would stab him 32 times. Afterwards, they would burn his farm and abduct his wife and son. After the attack, he was left to bleed out, and in his dying breath, he made a pact with the devil to survive. However, unknown to him, Mephisto was listening as he sensed his anger and resurrected him, but this would turn him into an insane demonic force of evil. With the powers of Anquilatrism, he is able to control anyone he comes into contact with. Driven by the loss of his wife and son, he intends to control Wakanda and usurp T'Challa as the true king, as he finds it unfair that the king gets to have a loving wife and soon son, whilst his family was destroyed. This would create a dynamic between Black Panther and Achebe, as both are driven by their families. Achebe, with the assistance of Claw, would manage to gain control of Wakanda through his powers of manipulation, causing T'Challa and Storm to go into hiding, whilst the nation under Achebe's control would label them as fugitives. Keep in mind that due to Storm's pregnancy, her powers are not at their full capacity, so Black Panther would have to navigate through mind-controlled forces, as well as trying to keep her safe. However, the two would manage to find a way to break through Achebe's mind control of the people through a synthetic herb crafted by the remains of the panther god Bass. Storm, who is still heavily pregnant, would engage in a battle with Claw, but she ultimately ends up killing the villain by igniting him with a rain of bolts, while Black Panther would engage in a climactic fight with Achebe and manage to regain the throne, gaining the trust of his people and reinforcing of how and why he is king of Wakanda. We would get a post-credit scene of the son of T'Challa and Storm being born into the world, who would be named Azari, but the moment of happiness would be interrupted when the door would open, revealing to be Emma Frost, as she would explain to Storm that the X-Men need her help. The next movie will be The Amazing Spider-Man 7. In this film, we would pick up with Peter and his life as a superhero, nephew, husband, and now a mentor, as he has taken the young hero, Miles Morales, under his wing. And I want this relationship to be akin to the PlayStation games, with Peter feeling like Miles' big brother. The young Spider-Man is still getting used to his powers, and is still trying to balance out his academics with his superhero work. We would also get a scene of Miles' daily life with his family, such as his mom and dad, as well as include some scenes with his uncle, as Miles sees him as someone he could really confide in. And we would open up to a classroom. We would see many students attentively listening to the teacher, who would turn out to be Peter Parker. And as he was giving a lecture about chemistry, Miles would barge into the room and ask that Mr. Parker come talk to him for a moment. Peter would tell Miles if it could wait after his class, but Miles urges him that this event is important. And with a knowing look, Peter tells the class to read up on page 394 before following Miles, and both of them would climb the stairs up to the roof to see a spaceship in the distance that was hurtling towards the city at high speeds. Peter would sigh to himself, saying that he is definitely getting fired after today, and both Spider-Men would leap from the rooftop and swing toward the direction of the falling spacecraft. Inside, we would see two astronauts struggling to control the ship, as the controls must have malfunctioned somehow, causing them to be hurtled down to the city. However, before the ship could hit the ground, both Spider-Men would manage to encase it with webbing to slow down its acceleration. But something would go wrong as one of Miles' web bindings would snap, causing the ship to collide with a section of a nearby building. Peter swoops into action, trying to prevent debris from falling to the ground and saving as many people as he can in the process. Whilst Miles, due to his inexperience, starts to panic. As the ship almost crashes onto the ground with all his strength, he manages to delay the fall just enough. But there's still some serious damages as the ship collides onto the ground with a hard crash, injuring several bystanders. A news outlet would be featured the next day, framing the two Spider-Men for the damages caused. And as it continues, it reveals that one of the astronauts was actually John Jameson, the son of J. Jonah Jameson, and he absolutely loses it and is furious at the two Spider-Men for critically injuring his only son. This would spark JJJ's obsession with bringing down Spider-Man once and for all, and he starts to fund a certain project created by esteemed scientist Alistair Smythe that is programmed on eliminating Spider-Man once and for all. Meanwhile, Miles feels ashamed of his inability to take action, and because of that, many people got hurt. But Peter reassured him that on the bright side, there are no deaths, and things would have been a lot worse had the two of them not intervened. Miles would ask Peter how he manages to do this every day, and Peter would tell him that a great man once told him that with great power comes great responsibility, and that is why we need to use these powers to save as many people as we can. Sometimes that doesn't mean everyone, but we still have to give her everything we've got. Meanwhile, a subject would be found to test the project, a convict named Matt Garden, and through various tests, he is injected with a serum and stuffed into a green armored scorpion suit, equipped with a tail. In his suit would be a kill switch implanted if he would ever disobey orders. And his first mission would be to find Spider-Man and kill him. Scorpion would follow that objective and would be unleashed onto the streets of New York and start to wreak havoc in an attempt to lure Spider-Man. Meanwhile, Peter is at him and MJ's apartment, with the latter talking about future travel plans, whilst Peter looks at his wallet with a disgruntled look. But the TV would be on, and a news broadcast would fill the screen as we would see a news helicopter from above capturing the Scorpion live, as he demands that Spider-Man show his face. Peter would get a call on his phone, and it would be Miles asking Peter if he's ready to suit up. But Peter would tell Miles to sit this one out, as it feels like it would be too dangerous for Miles to take on any superpowered individuals right now. Miles would try to protest, but Peter is adamant in his decision, and as he hangs up, he leaps out the window in his Spider-Man suit to confront Scorpion. Miles, on the other hand, is frustrated as he believes he could be more help out there than in his home, but nevertheless, he listens to his mentor, but keeps the news on to see what happens. Spider-Man encounters Scorpion, and the two would engage in a fierce fight. The hero starts to gain the upper hand, but is caught by surprise by Scorpion's stinger, which turns the tides as Scorpion starts to relentlessly beat Spider-Man into the ground. It would be a hard sight to watch as Spider-Man is beaten within an inch of his life, and before Scorpion could deliver another punch, a web is shot at his face. And Miles, fully costumed, would swing down to grab Peter before swinging away. Scorpion would tear the webbing off his face and start to pursue the Spider-Man as he would climb buildings and jump across rooftops. It would be an intense chase sequence as Miles holds an injured Peter while Scorpion chases them throughout the New York skyline. But eventually, Miles manages to get away using a large cloud of smoke coming out of a sewer grate, blocking Scorpion's view as he exits the smoke to find the two Spider-Men gone. Scorpion curses out to no one, and he gets a call back from Smythe, telling him to return to the lab. The villain would do so, and after he leaves, Miles would reappear holding Peter in his arms. He would look shocked at his new ability, as he did not know that he could turn invisible. Huh, cool. But Miles wouldn't celebrate too much as he takes Peter back to his apartment and MJ would patch him up. Meanwhile, Scorpion would be at the lab and be scolded by Smythe for not finishing the job, and Smythe would go on to call him a disappointment, and he would say that he knew he shouldn't have gotten the con to do his work. Smythe would then threaten to activate the kill switch on Gargan, but before that could happen, Gargan would go on to attack Smythe and beat him within an inch of his life before going off on his own, leaving the doctor brutally injured but still alive. Smythe, with his broken body, would then start to crawl into a secret room where inside would be a bunch of human-sized tubes, and inside of these tubes would be the robots known as the Spider Slayers. Smythe would then crawl to a control panel which would activate each of the robots, and he gives them the objective to hunt down and kill Scorpion as well as Spider-Man. Scorpion would then proceed to go after J. Jonah Jameson next, as he is the only other person with access to the kill switch. Meanwhile, Peter would start to regain consciousness, and at his side would be Miles and Mary Jane. Miles would then start to blame himself for not being able to defeat Scorpion, but Peter would go on to reassure Miles that he did the right thing in getting away, and that it was Peter's fault for not trusting Miles enough to help him in the first place. He didn't think he was ready, but he does now. And with that, both Spider-Men would head back out into the field to try and find Scorpion to take him down. But on the way, Miles would tell Peter that the reason he managed to get away in the first place was because of an ability that he didn't know he had. He could go invisible. This would shock Peter as he didn't know that Miles had this extra ability, but it wouldn't be long to find Scorpion as he was ripping through the Daily Bugle building looking for Jameson. Jameson, who didn't want anyone to get hurt because of him, would come out to face the monster he has created. And before Scorpion could strike him with his stinger, he is punched across the face by Spider-Man, and a battle would ensue with both Spider-Men versus the Scorpion. The two heroes would be in sync, covering for each other's blind spots and weaknesses, and they managed to give Scorpion a run for his money. But then, as soon as victory starts to become a possibility, a legion of Spider Slayers would start scaling the Daily Bugle building, and it would be all-out chaos with the two Spider-Men fighting off Scorpion and the Spider Slayers whilst trying to save lives in the process. Jameson would see this heroic act being displayed right before his eyes, and something finally clicks within his mind. After all these years, he has hated, berated, and blamed Spider-Man for his actions. But right here before him, he is seeing the hero fixing the mistake that Jameson himself has made. And as he sees the two Spider-Men saving lives in the process, with a solemn expression, Jameson admits to himself that he was wrong, and that Spider-Man truly is a hero. Spider-Man would then punch a Spider Slayer across the face, but his spider sense would go off, and Scorpion would stab him from behind yet again with his stinger. This causes Spider-Man to fall to the ground, and Scorpion would start to beat on him once more. Miles would see this and get enraged. He swings towards Scorpion and aims a punch, but something different would happen as an orb of energy would surround his... An orb of energy would surround his fist, and he would punch Scorpion away with an electric shock, sending the villain colliding with the wall and knocking him out. The two Spider-Men would then make quick work of the rest of the Spider Slayers, and the day would be saved. The movie would end with a broadcast of the Daily Bugle, showing Jameson admitting his mistakes, as well as praising the two Spider-Men for their heroic deeds, and Peter and Miles would be sitting on top of the school rooftop eating lunch. Peter would thank Miles for saving his life twice, and Miles would say that he's starting to get the hang of all this Spider-Man stuff, but he would ask Peter if it would ever get easier, and Peter would look at the clouds, contemplating. He would tell Miles that things might just get more complicated from here. We would get a post-credit scene of Smythe in his lab, still injured and hurt, before the door would swing open, revealing a man clad in purple armor. And alongside him would be the Kingpin. Smythe would ask Fisk what he wants, and Fisk would go on to say that he wants Smythe to work for him. The next show would be Cloak and Dagger Season 2. And I would honestly wouldn't change much compared to the original show. I thought it was a pretty good season. The only thing I would change would be some more references to the larger Marvel universe. And there will of course be a lot of callbacks to how Cloak and Dagger participated in the final battle of Infinity Gauntlet Part 2. A change I would make would be in the Season 2 finale, where in the end, when both Tyrone and Tandy would leave New Orleans, I'd have them travel to Massachusetts as a way to set up a future project. The movie following this will be Loki. This film would follow Loki after his escape using the Tesseract in Infinity Gauntlet Part 2. Some changes I would make in this film compared to the TV show would be to make Loki more villainous, as I find it more realistic that Loki, especially fresh out of the first Avengers movie, would be more sinister and more likely to backstab anyone that got close to him. The plot would be similar to the original TV show, as it would still set up Kang. However, Sylvie would be replaced with Amora the Enchantress from our timeline, as I feel that her and Loki could bounce off of each other really well. And I'd also like to add Scourge into the plot as well, just for more Asgardian representation. Amora and Scourge would be surprised of Loki's presence, but it would be explained to them that this Loki is from a different timeline. And as I said before, Loki would still be very villainous throughout the movie, but he will slowly start to develop into sort of a reluctant anti-hero by the end. But it won't be a quick change like it was in the original TV show. Throughout the movie, we would see moments of Loki and Amora starting to grow closer toward each other as they attempt to find the one who is kidnapping all the variants, in which they would, who would be He Who Remains. Scourge will be killed off by the end of the movie, and Enchantress would kill He Who Remains, causing the multiverse to become unstable, which would be a main plot point throughout this saga. The movie following will be Ant-Man: Small World. This movie would follow ex-convict Scott Lang as he becomes the new Ant-Man, with Janet as the one training him, filling in the spot for Hope. And this comment actually gave me the idea to include Bill Foster, aka Goliath, as the one who would take Hank's spot in teaching Scott about the suit. Shout out to Kieran Lehowley 1288 for this idea, as well as his other ideas in his comment. And I hope I pronounced that right. In regards to the movie, it would be pretty similar to the original 2015 film, with both Janet and Bill helping Scott control the suit and influence ants. Bill Foster, who was unable to be out in the field himself due to the injury he sustained during his battle with Team Captain America versus Team Iron Man in Avengers Civil War, where a robot clone of Thor named Ragnarok, created by Tony and Hank, would critically injure him, causing him to never be able to fight or even lead a normal life. It took a long time for Bill to recover, and an even longer time for him to forgive Hank. Even though he was told that the Hank from that time was a Skrull, he still couldn't stand to look at the man's face whom he once considered a friend. But Bill decided to wait out his emotions and to try and reconcile with Hank later in the future. But something unforeseen would happen. Hank would be killed in action, and Bill would feel immense guilt for never trying to reconnect with his friend. So in his eyes, helping Scott is his way of redeeming himself by continuing the Ant-Man legacy. The villain of this film would be the Hood, aka Parker Robbins, as he seeks to acquire Pym Industries through a hostile takeover and implement his own criminal enterprise, in which his company would seize a majority of Pym particles and other assets of Hank Pym. Due to contractual conflicts instigated by the U.S. government, the Avengers are unable to keep Hank's tech, which would lead to Janet wanting to find someone expendable to break into one of the Hood's bases and get the particles back. This is where Scott Lang comes in as the third party. He, alongside with Janet in a wasp suit, would break into the Hood's base. However, during this heist, they would encounter the villain known as Taskmaster, who would be under the Hood's payroll, and a fight would ensue, both Ant-Man and Wasp would battle the villain, and Taskmaster would make quick work of the inexperienced Ant-Man. However, Wasp is able to hold off Taskmaster long enough for Ant-Man to get away with portions of the Pym particles. And all of this would lead into the final battle, in which the Hood would threaten the life of Scott's daughter, Cassie. And as I said before, this would basically be the same as the 2015 Ant-Man movie, but with different characters. Except there won't be any love tension between Scott and Janet, because that would just be messed up. The movie would end with Ant-Man trapping the Hood within the quantum realm and returning back from subatomic levels. In the preceding events, Janet and Bill would be able to acquire back the rights of the Pym particles, and Scott is made as a part of the Avengers to be the new Ant-Man. We would get a short post-credit scene of a stage setup, and a casting director would be calling out names, and he would call out the name Simon Williams. There would be no response as the camera would shift to an empty hallway. He would call out Simon Williams again, and we would see an explosion burst from the wall before the screen cuts to black. After this movie would be a TV show, which would be Black Cat. And I made it a point to have this show be released on the 13th of Friday, because, get it? Friday the 13th. Bad luck. Black Cat. Okay. Anyway, this would be a 12-episode series following Felicia Hardy as the Black Cat. It would follow up on what she's been doing since the events of Amazing Spider-Man 5. I would have this show take place in Los Angeles just because I wanted to give New York time to breathe, as I feel like there are way too many characters located there, making it feel bloated, and I wanted this show to be its own thing. Black Cat would hit a major score, managing to steal an important diadem in a secured bank. Unbeknownst to her, that bank would be owned by the Chameleon, in which after he hears about what happened, he orders a major hit out on Black Cat and sets her bounty at about 10 million to whoever can bring her to him dead or alive. This show would basically be about Black Cat on the run, while several assassins are out for her head. Throughout the show, she would be fighting off these assassins, some of which would include the Enforcers, Tarantula, Kangaroo, Big Wheel, The Wall, and many others. Black Cat would defeat all of these goons in the first encounter, but another assassin would be after her as well, which would be Silver Sable, who Black Cat would be able to escape from in the first few encounters, but Sable would ultimately manage to subdue her and bring her to the Chameleon. But Chameleon would dishonor his agreement in giving Sable the money, which would lead into an all-out fight where Sable would free Black Cat and the two would fight off Chameleon's goons. But the criminal manages to get away undetected. Now Black Cat would be watching over her shoulder, knowing that the Chameleon is out for blood, and the fact that he could be anywhere and could be anyone would be a prominent theme. Throughout the show, I want to lean heavily on Chameleon's Master of Disguise motif and have him torture Felicia through mental means, where she doesn't know who is real or who is the Chameleon. In the final episodes, the Chameleon would manage to get the jump on Black Cat and would be about to kill her before she is ultimately saved by Silver Sable. Together, the two would defeat the Chameleon, and Sable would be about to kill him before Black Cat would stop her. Sable would question her on this, and Black Cat would tell her that someone once told her about responsibility, and that power must come in accordance with that. Sable would understand and then let the Chameleon live, and she would tell Felicia to take care of herself. Black Cat would then take the Chameleon and leave him tied up to a lamppost next to the police station, and the show would end with Black Cat swinging throughout the streets of LA with a clearer vision of the future. The next project will be Blade and the Midnight Suns. This would not only be the third Blade movie, but it will also follow the formation of the Midnight Suns. The team would consist of Blade, Doctor Strange, Ghost Rider, Shang-Chi, Cloak, Dagger, Iron Fist, and Moon Knight. This movie would be rated R and explore more of the supernatural side of the MCU. This movie would also feature Dormammu as the main antagonist, as he seeks to merge the Earth with the Dark Dimension in order to fulfill an ancient prophecy, one which states that he is meant to rule over all life, and he wants to start with Earth. In this process, He breaks Baron Mordo out of his imprisonment, as the prophecy states how Mordo is said to help him on this endeavor. Doctor Strange in response would gather allies who he knows would be able to help him, such as Shang-Chi, Iron Fist, Moon Knight, and Ghost Rider. In terms of location, I'd have this movie primarily take place in Salem, Massachusetts. Original, I know. This is also where Tyrone and Tandy would have ended up going to at the end of Cloak and Dagger Season 2, and Doctor Strange would recognize their abilities as useful to his cause, so he recruits them as well. That would leave Blade, who initially isn't a team player, but the circumstances are quite dire, so he doesn't really have a choice. The Avengers are preoccupied in New York, so it's up to the Midnight Suns to step up to the plate and stop Dormammu, Baron Mordo, and the army of mindless ones. I'd want this film to explore many elements of horror and magic, as well as having a darker tone. By the end of the film, a final battle would ensue, in which Doctor Strange would create a portal to the Dark Dimension in order to send back Dormammu's forces. However, due to the overwhelming amount of magic in order to do this will be the last time he is able to conjure up a portal to the Dark Dimension, and once the portal closes, it could never be opened again. During the final battle, Blade would fight against Baron Mordo, and it would be a hard-fought clash, but Blade would be able to slice through Mordo's body, killing the malevolent sorcerer, and the Midnight Suns would manage to defeat Dormammu's forces as he was forced to retreat back into the Dark Dimension. But Dormammu, wanting retribution, would drag Blade into the Dark Dimension with him, and before anyone could react, the portal would close, and Blade would be trapped within the Dark Dimension with Dormammu.
Okay guys, so that's part 2 finish, so that's part 1 finish right now. Go to part 2. So let's do part 2.
Let's begin. Continuing this phase will be Deadpool 3. And the overall plot of this film would be, I'd have Deadpool stumble onto the Mojoverse, in which the main antagonist would be Mojo. And he is essentially a reality TV show host in which he gathers or really kidnaps unsuspecting victim and throws them into his own world for his own personal amusement as well as his audience's amusement. And so I feel like Deadpool would be the perfect character to throw in this scenario, as I can just think of a bunch of hijinks that he could get into. And I would actually have him meet Jeff the Land Shark in this movie, just not only as a fun cameo, but also just to establish the wacky cosmic side of the Marvel Universe. Deadpool would also run into another person trapped in the world who would go by the name of Owen Reese. He was once an Earth scientist until one of his inventions had gone horribly wrong. And although Deadpool wouldn't know it yet, this man would eventually become one of the most pivotal points of this saga. And so the unlikely trio of Deadpool, Jeff, and Owen would traverse through the dangers of Mojo World and would eventually come out on top. And thus they would eventually be forced to confront Mojo. And it would be a hard-fought battle until Owen would be able to regain more of his powers. And so, even with a fraction of his power, he manages to dismantle Mojo with ease. But then he is confused and shaken at his own abilities and flies away into the deep depths of space, leaving a dismantled Mojo, a disgruntled audience, and a crumbling world in which Deadpool and Jeff manages to escape by hijacking one of Mojo's ships and blasting off, managing to escape the crumbling planet. And that's how I met Jeff, Deadpool said, while Lady Death was eagerly listening. And it appears that this entire movie would have been just a story told to Lady Death by Deadpool, and regarding his tales of how he met the strange land shark. The movie following will be Avengers Disassembled. This movie will essentially be a loose adaptation of the actual Avengers Disassembled comic, in which we would see the Avengers team start to crumble from within. We open up to a black screen. until suddenly a bright light would come into view and the screen would shift to old footage of Captain America fighting in the front lines of World War II, and it would then change to Iron Man flying with fighter jets chasing after him. After that, it would show Ant-Man fighting hired guns along with the Wasp, followed by Thor fighting the Destroyer in New Mexico. After this, we would see Hulk fighting the Abomination in Harlem, before the screen would show many men being shot by arrows from Hawkeye. The screen would then shift many times, featuring many moments of each member of the Avengers. We would then hear a loud, screeching noise before the screen would cut to black yet again. We then cut to the Avengers compound in present day, and a notable absence in the environment would be present, as the team would still feel the loss of two of their core members, Tony Stark and Hank Pym. And since the Avengers are without their financer, it is hard to maintain the costs and budgets of what they do, using the remaining assets that Stark owned to sustain their living. By that point, the team had actually gained new members, with the new formation being Captain America, Falcon, Hawkeye, Wasp, Ant-Man, She-Hulk, Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, and Vision. Thor has reclaimed his role as king of New Asgard, so he left the Avengers to focus more on that, whilst Bruce Banner has been exonerated for his role in stopping Thanos. The world still sees him as the monster who destroyed Earth back in World War Hulk, so it is best that he was not on the team. As Bruce, and even Bruce, sees himself that he is too dangerous to be let loose again, so he now resides in a secluded lab far away from civilization, which left a slot open for She-Hulk to make her debut as an Avenger, as she hopes to win back the public's perception to Hulks. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver have left their father's crusade in order to fight for something more righteous, and thus they have joined the Avengers, with Scarlet Witch in particular having a close connection with the synthetic android known as Vision, and the two have grown quite close, and there have been many moments throughout the film that highlights that. And even though Scott knows that he has earned the Ant-Man mantle, he still fears that he has big shoes to fill and will try his best to live up to the legacy of Hank Pym. Whilst in the Avengers compound, we see that the team is celebrating their most recent win against the villainous organization known as the Wrecking Crew. And I would use this moment to delve into more about the team's dynamic. In this moment, we would see Vision and Scarlet Witch starting to connect more, due to their shared experiences of feeling like outcasts. Hawkeye and Quicksilver would also appear to have a brotherly bond, which is something that I think would have happened in the original MCU, if, well, you know.
Oh, ouch! Oh man, gee willikers, this really hurts!
She-Hulk and Ant-Man would be having a drinking contest, and Captain America and Falcon would be talking with each other. This is where Steve would reveal to Sam that after all of these years of fighting, he feels that his time is almost up, which surprises Sam, as he didn't see Steve as one to just retire. But Steve would reassure him that's not going to happen at the moment, but just in case that in the future, that if he falls in battle, or if he comes to the decision that he wants to put down the shield, there is no one else that he would want to be Captain America but Sam. Foreshadowing perhaps. We would then cut to Janet alone in what used to be her and Hank's room, which is now just her room. She sits in bed holding Hank's first ever helmet that he created. This would be a tender moment, as we would see Janet's saddened expression as she still recounts the moments of Hank's neck being broken by Thanos. But then all of a sudden, the alarm would be set off, and all of the Avengers would have their guard up. A loud explosion would occur on the side of the compound. The Avengers would suit up before going to see what could cause the damage, and what they find is a lone figure radiating ionic energy from his body. This figure would appear to be Wonder Man, as he announces that he has been sent on a mission to retrieve something from the Avengers, and a battle would ensue. Wonder Man actually puts up a pretty good fight, and he fights off the team for a bit. However, he is still getting used to his powers, and Wasp notices an earpiece that appears to be sending orders to him. Discreetly, she flies beside Wonder Man's ear to be able to hear the voice from the earpiece, but it is muffled by static. Wonder Man notices her and swats her away. The fight continues until the Avengers start getting the upper hand, and manages to subdue Wonder Man. The next morning comes quick, as Wonder Man is currently in a power-dampening holding cell designed by Vision. He is being questioned by She-Hulk and Falcon, in which they learn that his real name is Simon Williams, and he was previously an actor that suddenly gained superpowers. Watching them would be Captain America, Vision, and Scarlet Witch. She-Hulk would ask questions such as who sent him, but Simon would deflect those questions, stating that his boss would kill him if he said anything. Sam then remarks, "What makes him think that they won't kill him too?" Simon, seeing the point of this, would then relent and says that he has been sent to retrieve Scarlet Witch as he looks at Wanda through the window and bring her back to his boss. The Avengers would question him further, and he reveals almost everything besides the identity of who sent him. Wanda would then leave the listening room, in which Vision would follow her. Wanda would feel that she is responsible for all of this, but Vision would reassure her that none of this is her fault. And in response, Wanda would then envelop Vision in a hug, which confuses the android as he still has a lot to learn when it comes to human interactions. But unknown to the two of them, a spy bug would be looking through the window from the tree line of the base, and the screen would then cut to a mysterious figure sitting in a chair, their back turned to the screen as he watches the Avengers. How interesting. A couple of days would pass, and we would see She-Hulk taking on a case in court, as she defends her client from an accusation. Just to be clear, so you tried to fight the vigilante known as Daredevil with a paste gun? And your affiliated name was? Don't make me say it again, ma'am. This is purely for confidential records, Mr. Petruski. Pasteball Pete. The trial would appear to be proceeding normally, but that would change when She-Hulk, out of nowhere, would fly into a blind rage as she would start destroying everything that was in her sight. Civilians in the courtroom would flee as She-Hulk was rampaging throughout the building. Court guards would attempt to shoot her, but the bullets just bounced off her skin, as she would start tearing through the guards, severely injuring them. News outlets would record this rampage as She-Hulk would take this chaos out into the streets, as cars would be thrown and buildings would be destroyed. We would see reporters start calling this the second reckoning of the Hulk. She-Hulk would be wreaking havoc across the streets until all of a sudden an arrow would come flying into view, but it would just bounce off of She-Hulk's skin. This, however, did get her attention, and the screen would cut to Hawkeye standing on the edge of a building, preparing to fire another arrow at She-Hulk. This would cause her to yell and charge at the archer. As she would reach the building, she would claw her way up to the roof, and Hawkeye would be raining down arrows at her. They still do nothing, but before She-Hulk could reach Hawkeye, a giant hand would grab her. This would be Giant Man, as he would have She-Hulk in his palm. However, this only enrages her further, as she would break free and latch onto Giant Man's neck before beginning to squeeze, causing Giant Man to collapse onto the ground, where She-Hulk would still be strangling him. But Yellow Blast would sting She-Hulk, and she would turn her attention to Wasp, and the Green Woman would charge at her and swing a punch. However, Wasp would shrink down before it could connect and fly up to She-Hulk's nose. She-Hulk would be smacking her own face, attempting to get Wasp out of her body, and Wasp would be trying to knock She-Hulk out. But before that could happen, one of She-Hulk's slap to herself would get Wasp out through She-Hulk's ear, as she would revert back to regular size, and she would try to get away, but She-Hulk would rip off one of her wings and grab Wasp's legs. But before she could do anything, Vision would rocket towards She-Hulk with a punch to her face, causing her to be flung back. And She-Hulk would be ready to get up and fight once more. But similar to how Hulk's rampage ended in Age of Ultron, she would look around and see the carnage that she has brought. This would slowly have her regain her senses before she is swiftly knocked out by Captain America's shield. After the battle, Captain America, Wasp, Hawkeye, Ant-Man, and Vision would all discuss what just happened and how two unexplainable events happened around the same time. First was Wonder Man's attack last night, and now this. Hawkeye would pull out a small dart that he found on She-Hulk's neck, and it looked to be like an adrenaline dose. It appears that the dose was recently used, which would why She-Hulk just flew into a rage out of nowhere. But the question is, where did this dart come from? This confuses the team even more, and Captain America suspects that these can't be coincidences and that someone is trying to tear them apart, and he wants answers. Meanwhile, Sam Wilson would be having a meeting with the United Nations discussing geopolitical events. By his side would be Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, and around them would be ambassadors from all over the globe, such as representatives from France, Germany, Turkey, Wakanda, England, Latveria, etc. But then out of nowhere, Sam would start to feel a little sweaty, and he feels his words start to slur as he focuses his eyes on the Latverian ambassador. With his slurred speech, Sam would call out the ambassador and start to insult him, which would offend him greatly, and other members would try to mitigate the situation, and both Wanda and Pietro would try to calm Sam down, but not understanding where this is coming from. But then Sam would all of a sudden pull out a gun and threaten to shoot the Latverian ambassador, causing many armed guards to restrain him and take him into custody. Later on, Steve Rogers would then visit Sam in a holding cell, and Sam would tell Steve what happened wasn't his fault, and that he felt something that he hasn't felt in a long time, the feeling of being drunk. However, this wasn't possible because Sam had been sober for over 2 decades. Steve would tell Sam that he believes him, and that strange events have been happening to the Avengers sequentially, and that he's trying to get to the bottom of this. In a secluded area, the same mysterious figure from before would then chuckle to himself and declare that he is finally ready before he gets up and walks out of the door. The rest of the movie would play similarly to a mystery/suspense type of genre, where the Avengers are basically trying to figure out the root cause of all of these incidents. The public perception of the Avengers has definitely worsened, as many people, as well as many governments, are calling out for them to be disbanded or put into custody. We would see Scarlet Witch in front of the holding cell of Simon Williams, in which the two would talk, and Wanda would try to get him to tell her what he knows. Simon would be hesitant, but would only agree on one condition, that he was released from his cell. Wanda would of course deny this request, but Simon is persistent in telling her that if she truly wants answers, he will have to show her rather than tell her. After much deliberation, Wanda finally relents and destroys the cell that was holding Wonder Man. Wonder Man would stretch, relieved that he was finally out of that cell, and then he would beckon the Scarlet Witch to follow him, in which he flies through the ceiling, with Wanda at his tail. A couple hours later, Captain America, Ant-Man, Wasp, Hawkeye, and Vision would return to the compound, in which they all have realized what has happened, that Wonder Man has escaped. However, before they could act any further, they are alerted on their scanners, in which when they open up the screen, it would show a large army of drones flying toward the compound. The Avengers would be ready for battle as the hordes of drones approach the compound. In the chaos, we would see many drones flying overhead, in which we would see them start to attack nearby cities while the Avengers are kept busy. We would see buildings start to collapse and roads being destroyed, with hordes of drones flying all over the city. We would see policemen as well as many other authoritative figures trying to stop them, shooting their bullets, but they only bounce off of the droids' metallic armors before they're quickly dealt with, and the drones continue to invade the city. The Avengers are fending off the drones from their base, whilst Captain America tells Hawkeye and Vision to go towards the city, while the rest of them hold them off here. Simon and Wanda descend onto an abandoned building, and once they enter, they see the same mysterious figure that was present from before. The figure praises Wonder Man for his work and approaches Wanda, telling her that she is the key to his ultimate plan. Wanda would then ask what that plan was, and the figure would say that she would find out in due time. Meanwhile, the Avengers would continue fighting off the drones, dismantling them one by one, but Vision would notice something oddly familiar about their designs, but he can't place his finger on it. Simultaneously, the figure would continue to talk to Wanda as he recounts all of the heroics of the Avengers in the past and reckons that the next step of evolution is obviously coming forth. However, it appears that humans can't accept that. Being a mutant, Wanda understands this sentiment all too well, as normal people are usually afraid of what mutants can do. The figure would then press on, saying that evolution always finds a way. And as Hawkeye and Vision have finished up dispatching the drone, each of the drone's remains are scattered throughout the entire city. However, they start to give off a strange beeping sound. Meanwhile, the mysterious figure presses on, and with a final laugh, he states, "In the end, it is me who is the next stage of evolution." As he says this, a red flash would go off from his body, in which we would go back to the Avengers, and before anyone could react, all of the drone parts self-destruct, causing even more damage to the city and its people. Captain America protects himself and Ant-Man from the explosions, whilst Vision is flung, and Hawkeye, who notices a child, gets in the way of the explosions, protecting him. Wanda would ask who the figure was, and the figure would step out of the shadows as he says, "I am the future." The dust settles, and what is left is a destroyed city. We would see many destroyed buildings as well as many people lying dead on the ground. The damage isn't much better at the Avengers compound, as we would see enormous amounts of debris, and we would see Captain America lift himself up from the rubble, helping up the Wasp and Ant-Man, all three of whom managed to survive the explosion. And we would cut back to the city, and we would see Vision rising from the debris, and he would scan around looking for any signs of life, and his head would drop as he would realize that that explosion has caused an enormous amount of death. But then he quickly realizes that he doesn't see Hawkeye, and he would fly around scanning for his comrade, and then he would spot something. He would land, and he would lift up a chunk of debris, revealing Hawkeye. But he was not alone. There was a crying child under him, and it would appear that Hawkeye has saved the child from falling debris. Vision would then lift up the child, and he would do the same with Hawkeye. But then he freezes when he quickly realizes that he doesn't sense a pulse in the Archer, and so Vision would try to wake Hawkeye up, but it is no use. We would then cut back to Scarlet Witch, in which she looks confused, but Ultron would then propose the idea that they join forces in order to eliminate humans, as they were both targeted by them for their differences. But Wanda has heard enough, as she signals her brother to attack, and a blue streak dashes onto Ultron, punching him to a wall. Wonder Man is confused before Quicksilver punches him as well, and Scarlet Witch explains that before she talked to Simon, she told her brother to follow her just in case of anything happening, and both Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch charge into battle with Ultron and Wonder Man. The fight continues until Wonder Man grabs Quicksilver by the neck. Ultron orders him to kill him, but Simon is hesitant, as he has never killed anyone before. Ultron would then call him useless, and blasts him with his beams, before unleashing his secret army of Ultron bots onto the three of them. The dust settles, and as the Avengers are still recovering from the explosion, Captain America is seen pondering, trying to figure out what could be the root cause of all of these events. But then his questions would be halted when he spots Vision floating up in the air. The android descends down, holding a dead Hawkeye in his arms. Wasp would cover her mouth in shock, and Scott would be in shock as well. Vision would lay Hawkeye down, and he would look at Captain America with a knowing look, and that look would tell Steve all he needs to know, that the team has lost another member. Whilst the Avengers are still silent in respect for their teammate, Vision would then speak up, saying that he did notice something similar about the designs of the drones. He wasn't sure at first, but now he is positive that this is the work of Ultron. Captain America and Wasp would question this, as they know that Ultron had died years ago, but Vision would correct them, saying that Ultron did not truly die, as they did defeat the remaining Ultron bots. However, his consciousness was still integrated in the Earth somehow, and how he must have spent all of this time waiting and planning, trying to bide out his time and seeking for the perfect moment to strike, which would be now. At the same time, we would see the trio of Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, and Wonder Man still fighting the Ultron bots. However, they're starting to get overwhelmed as the amount of robots would be too many, and they would slowly start to get subdued, with Wonder Man being knocked out in the process. Quicksilver would also start to get overwhelmed, as we would see many Ultron bots start to assault him. Scarlet Witch would see this, and this would awaken something in her that she has not felt before. As she sees her brother being beaten within an inch of his life, she unleashes a gargantuan amount of hex magic, dismantling all of the Ultron bots around her. However, she would not stop there, as she would set her sights on Ultron, in which the two would begin to battle. Ultron would be getting the upper hand. However, due to the unpredictability of Scarlet Witch's hex magic, he is quickly beginning to get overwhelmed. Scarlet Witch continues to lose her mind in the process, and everything all comes to a head where she finally begins to dismantle Ultron from the inside out, deconstructing his armor and turning him into a distorted heap of metal. It would look as if Ultron was defeated. However, this would not be the case, as we would hear an omnipresent voice around the hideout as Ultron would mock the Scarlet Witch, saying how she just gave him the perfect opportunity to finally switch into an even better body. The voice of Ultron would then dissipate, but not before telling Scarlet Witch that they will meet again soon. Scarlet Witch has not come down though, as she is unable to control her powers. Quicksilver would see this and take his sister in his arms before dashing off into an unknown location, leaving an injured Wonder Man unconscious in the hideout. Back at the Avengers hideout, all of the Avengers are still in shock at the prospect of Ultron still being alive. However, this would be cut short as we would see Vision start to hold his head in pain as the android would begin to scream. Captain America, Ant-Man, and Wasp would ask him what was wrong, and Vision would tell them that it feels like as if someone was trying to take control of his mind. The Wasp would instantly think it was Scarlet Witch's doing, but Captain America would reassure her that Scarlet Witch was not around, and Vision's screaming would then stop, and it would be replaced by a small laugh as we would see the android start to lift his head in the utmost confidence, and he would stare at each of the members of the Avengers. He would linger his gaze on Wasp, looking at her in disgust, and Vision would begin to speak. "Mrs. Van Dyne, how pleasurable it is to see you again." Captain America would then realize that this was Ultron. Vision would then notice Captain America's look and would state, "Yes, Captain, your suspicions are correct. After years of effort, I finally managed to transport my subconsciousness into my rightful body. Sublime, isn't it?" Each of the Avengers would still be staring at Ultron in shock and a hint of fear as they realized that they might be no match for the combined power of both Vision and Ultron, especially since they are all hurt and tired. Vision would then set his sights on the new Ant-Man. Scott would recoil at Ultron's gaze. "My father's replacement, huh?" Vision would then step towards Ant-Man. "What a shame. I would have hoped to at least seen his face to my return, but I guess this understudy will have to do." Vision would then linger his gaze at Wasp once more. "It is quite ironic that both of my creators have long since passed, while I still remain. It must be a testament to the evolution of technology and how it is destined to outlast mankind." He would then look at Captain America. "Don't worry, Avengers, I won't kill you here. No, that's too good for you. I'll let you live to see what I am capable of, and to see the horror on your faces as you realize the inevitability of my succession." Vision would then float up into the air before darting off into the sky, heading off into a location unknown, leaving the trio of Captain America, Ant-Man, and Wasp in a state of utter hopelessness. The compound has been destroyed. One of their members are dead. 2 are currently in custody. 2 have gone off the grid, and one of them is being controlled by Ultron somewhere. The sky weeps as this day will forever be marked that the Avengers had been broken. Hold your horses though, because this phase is not over yet, as the final film of Phase 7 will be Venom. And this movie will essentially explain the aftermath of TASM 6. I'd have Eddie Brock survive the events of that film and move to San Francisco as a way to start a new life. The 2018 Venom movie will be a large inspiration for this film, as Eddie slowly learns the ropes of becoming an anti-hero. The main villains will still be the Life Foundation, who are tracking Venom down, and I'd have the final fight with Riot be generally the same. And yeah, that has been.
So that's the phase, my reaction to Some Dude MCU Phase 7. So yeah, so we had X-Men No Snow, Sunshine Raging Over Time, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, Amazing Spider-Man 7, Rookie, Ant-Man Small World, Blade Animation, Deadpool 3, Avengers Death Assemble, Venom, and we had Midnight Season 2, Crocodile Season 2, Black Cat. So yeah, so that's the video reaction for the show. Hope you enjoy the video, mention and thumbs up, and then to subscribe, put the notification on, and thumbs up with this video. So next video will be tomorrow, will be pre-cheating online. So I'll see you tomorrow.